Welcome to the Money Management Strategies module on building good credit. This is one in a series of educational tutorials that have been created for you by the University of San Francisco School of Law to help you get on target to succeed financially while in law school. In this module, we're really going to look at two issues: helping you to understand credit reports and credit scoring, and how to make sure that you're building a good credit history. Because success financially in life depends upon having good credit. And the law school is committed to you making good financial choices and getting on track financially, just as they're committed you to becoming well-trained in the area of the law that you have interest. So this is part of their goal in helping you be better informed about how to manage your life, particularly financially. Because it is important that you succeed financially in life. And we want to make sure that money doesn't become an issue for you and how you manage money and your credit. And this is one in a series of modules on money management. I'd encourage you to check out several others, one particular on building your budget to help you develop a budget or spending plan, and a module on how to save on spending, how to take control of your expenses. But in this module, we're going to focus on credit. So let's get started. You and your credit, what do you need to know? Well, I think you should understand the importance of good credit, credit reporting, credit scoring, and how to develop and maintain good credit. So let's start with the importance of good credit. Credit counts. Having credit means you've been given the ability to borrow money from someone or some entity, and you've agreed to pay it back over time, usually with interest. Why is having good credit important to you? Well, you may need good credit to qualify for credit or loans, including certain education programs like the Grad Plus loan while you're here in the law school. For the Grad Plus loan, you cannot have adverse credit. You may need good credit to get the job you want. Most employers now will ask to see your credit report as part of their process of making sure you're a good fit for their organization. You likely will need to have good credit to get affordable insurance. And good credit also helps you to achieve your other financial goals. For example, being able to buy a car and getting a loan at a reasonable rate, being able to purchase a home, again, not only to qualify for a mortgage, but to get a low interest rate on that mortgage. And you may need good credit to borrow for your children's education when the time comes. So having good credit is important to you. And the types of credit accounts that you might have are important to understand as well. Mortgages are loans that you're borrowing for the purchase of real estate, particularly your primary residence. There are installment loans. This is debt that is borrowed and then repaid in monthly installments over time. For example, student loans and auto loans are examples of installment loans. As it happens, mortgages, the loan you take out to buy a home, is also an example of an installment loan. But in the credit monitoring and the credit sort of reporting industry, mortgages for the purchase of a home are treated a little bit differently from other types of installment loans, particularly in terms of credit scoring. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. There's also revolving credit. This would be your credit cards. This would be lines of credit. These are credit accounts you have where the amount you owe can fluctuate over time based upon decisions you're making. With revolving credit, typically you have a maximum limit on how much you can borrow, but it's up to you to decide from day to day, week to week, month to month, how much you're actually utilizing that available credit. And so credit cards are the most typical type of revolving credit, but you also might have a line of credit. There are also other types of credit accounts that are generally referred to as finance accounts. The best example of this would be a payday type loan. These are typically very expensive types of credit accounts. You typically want to avoid them if you can, because they also tend to have the most negative impact when it comes to your credit score. But again, we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. The key here is to understand that not all credit accounts are viewed in the credit reporting and credit history system, and particularly in the credit scoring system, exactly the same. So what is credit reporting? Your credit report is a record of how well you've managed your credit accounts over time. It's derived from data in your credit history. And your credit history has been created by information that's provided to credit bureaus by your creditors. And the information in your credit report provides a measure of your willingness to pay a debt on time. In other words, it tells us how likely are you to pay back debt on time. And it would be comparable to your credit transcript. Just as you have an academic transcript that shows us how well you've performed in your coursework, your credit report really is a transcript of how you've managed your credit over time. It's a history, in other words. And it typically comes from a national credit reporting agency. And the three national credit reporting agencies are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, although there are also smaller regional credit reporting agencies as well. Credit reporting. What's in your credit report? Well, there's certain information that is included in your credit report. For example, there's personal identifying information, your name, your birth date, your social security number, your current address, phone number, perhaps an email address. It would list fraud alerts. Have you notified any of the national credit reporting agencies that you feel that you've become a victim of identity theft or credit fraud? It gives a summary of your credit accounts. It gives you a history of each account. It provides information about who has accessed your credit report. These are called credit inquiries. This is when someone has pulled your credit report. And this would even include when you pull your credit report. It would list any accounts that went to collection. These are accounts where you failed to repay the debt on time. So the creditor sent it to a collection agency to try to collect on the debt, and this is a derogatory type of action. It would list any other public records, such as if there had been any tax liens, where the IRS had put a lien on your assets to collect back taxes. It would include bankruptcies. It would include any other kinds of sort of derogatory payment activity or payment behavior on your part on your credit accounts. And finally, it would include a dispute file. This is where you have submitted a written dispute to something that's appearing on your credit report because you feel that it's been reported in error, and yet you've been unsuccessful in getting the creditor to remove that information from your credit report. If you do feel it's an error, but the creditor is unwilling to remove it, you do have the right to submit a limited written narrative explaining why you feel that particular reported item is incorrect. And then that would be shared with anyone who was then pulling your credit report, perhaps to consider offering you credit in the future. Disputes do not represent, though, your opportunity to write an explanation on why you had bad credit. In other words, why you missed a payment, why you had an account went to collection. It just allows you to write a dispute where you feel that something has been reported in error. With regard to credit reporting, there's certain information that's not in your credit report. The information listed here is not included in your credit report. And that would include your race, your gender, your religious affiliation, your national origin, your sexual orientation, your medical history. It does not include any information about your income or earnings. It doesn't provide any information about your checking or savings account numbers or balances. It does not list the interest rates you're being charged on your credit accounts. It does not have any information about any criminal record you may have. So there's a lot of information that is important in terms of who you are as a person, but that is not permitted under current federal law, or is just by practice not included on your credit report. So be mindful of the fact that your credit report is not a complete history or explanation of who you are as a person. It's simply a history of the credit accounts you have and how you've managed those accounts over time. So with credit reporting, it is important that you check your credit report periodically. And why is that important? Well, it's because, first of all, errors could occur. You know, the records that are reported to the credit bureaus are keyed by your name, birth date, and social security number. And there are lots of people living in the United States, and many others may have, or at least a few others may have, your same first and last name. And that's assuming that the entity, the crediting company, credit reporting agency, or the creditor reporting information has correctly spelled your name. So it's very possible, although it hopefully doesn't happen, but it could occur that somehow someone else's information is reported to your credit history and therefore appears on your credit report. And it could take several months for you to correct those errors. But another reason for checking your credit report is it helps you to detect if you become a victim of identity theft or credit fraud. Because if you look at your credit report and you see that there's either credit accounts or activity on your accounts that you don't recognize, then it is likely the case that you're at least a victim of identity theft and perhaps credit fraud. And you'd want to address that right away by immediately contacting each of the 3 national credit reporting agencies, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, to make them aware that you believe fraud has occurred, because then you'd at least want to get a fraud alert posted to your credit reports, and might even want to take more serious actions, such as putting a lock on your credit account so that no one can access your credit account information without taking several steps to get your permission. In general, checking your credit report is simply a good financial habit to form, that you want to get in the habit of periodically checking your credit report. And how can you obtain your credit report? Well, you can obtain a free copy of your report at annualcreditreport.com. This is the website that each of the 3 national consumer credit reporting agencies created so that all consumers could get a free copy of their credit report once every 12 months. Because there is a federal law, it's called the FACT Act, the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, that was passed in 2003, that requires that all consumers have a right to see a copy of their credit report that appears on each of the 3 national credit reporting agencies, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, at no cost to the consumer. Now, in the current world, we also know that a lot of the companies you do business with, particularly your bank, may give you the opportunity to see a copy of your credit report for free. There are also websites, for example, creditkarma.com, where you can obtain a copy of your credit report for free. But if you want to get the most comprehensive view of your credit report that would also provide you with added consumer information to help you understand what you're seeing on your credit report, I encourage you to also take advantage of the right that you have to get a free copy of your credit report from each of the 3 national credit reporting agencies on an annual basis every 12 months at annualcreditreport.com. There is no cost to you for that, nor does it in any way negatively affect your credit or lower your credit score because you've obtained a copy of your own credit report. So that's our discussion about credit reports. Now let's focus in on credit scoring. So what's a credit score? A credit score is a numerical forecast of the likelihood you'll successfully repay a future loan on time. It's based on the credit account information in your credit report, and it's an automated credit evaluation tool based on statistical modeling of credit risk. And your credit score really is a way in which a creditor can get a very quick sense of what is the probability that if they loaned you money, you would pay them back on time. So it's really a measure of risk, and it's statistical in nature, but it's an important factor. And in essence, it's sort of like your credit GPA. Just as you have an academic grade point average, it's a number that really allows us to get a sense of how well are you likely going to do in a future class based upon how well you've performed in prior classes. Well, similarly, your credit score gives us the ability to get a sense of what is the probability you will perform successfully at repaying a future debt based upon how you have repaid the credit you've already had. So it's a very important number. In fact, in many cases, it's probably more important to you in your future than is your academic GPA. And it's important to understand credit scores from the standpoint of the company that created them, Fair Isaac. And it's important to understand what do we mean by Fico credit scores, because you may have heard this term used in the past. Fico credit scores were first developed by Fair Isaac and Company. In fact, Fico stands for Fair Isaac and Company. And Fair Isaac was the first company to ever create a credit score. They came up with this whole system of risk, really assessing risk from the information that was reported in your credit history. FICO scores typically range from 300 to 850, and it's basically virtually impossible to have a score of 300, which would be very bad, and it's virtually impossible to have an 850, which would be a perfect score, because to get a perfect score would imply that there is no risk to a creditor in loaning you money. And there is always going to be at least a little bit of risk. But here, clearly, the higher the score, the better. The higher score is the better score. So you want to get your score as close to that top number as possible. Now, currently, typically, the only way you can actually obtain a FICO credit score is to purchase it directly from Fair Isaac at myfico.com. But again, in recent times, we've seen that there are cases where you may actually be given a complimentary credit score by some entity, perhaps one of the companies you already have credit with, many of the credit card companies now, as a service to their customers, give them the opportunity to have a free credit score, at least on a quarterly basis. Your bank may offer that. Again, sites like creditkarma.com also offer you the opportunity to get a credit score at no cost. But you want to be mindful that those credit scores may not be FICO credit scores. In other words, they may not be credit scores that were generated using the methodology that has been developed by Fair Isaac. And yet, FICO credit scores are still used primarily as the credit scores that lenders use to assess whether or not they're going to loan you money. About 75% of all credit scores that are used by creditors to make credit decisions are, in fact, FICO scores. So if you're wanting to see your credit score, it would be better to see your FICO credit score. But also recognize that there are many different FICO credit scoring models. Because in essence, how your credit score is calculated, it's based upon a statistical model. And that model was created by examining millions of credit reports over 2 different periods of time, typically separated by about 24 months. And the statistical model was looking to see what factors or what items reported on the credit report had the most power in predicting the probability that during that span of time, in this case 24 months, that the individual would have missed a payment or had derogatory payment behavior. And again, because we're looking at millions of copies of credit reports, over time, those models change, and a creditor can actually get Fair Isaac to create a customized scoring model because, for example, maybe that company has a very regional kind of client or customer base. So they're more interested in getting a scoring model that is based upon customers that live in their regional territory or their area rather than more broadly across the whole country. So just be aware that there are many different FICO scoring models. And whenever you pull or obtain your credit score, it's been taken and derived from using one of those models based on the information that was in your credit report at that point in time. And so I think what's really important is not what is the number itself, but rather when you get that number, is that score considered to be excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor? Because you want, hopefully, for your credit score to be in the excellent range. What number it is in that range is probably not all that important. But you want the score to be in the range where you would be considered to be an excellent credit risk and therefore would be a very good candidate for a lender to loan money to and would likely get a more favorable rate in terms of the interest rate to borrow that money. So what factors affect how your FICO credit score is calculated? Well, there are 5 primary factors that go into calculating your score, but they're not all of equal weight. The most important factor is your payment history, and it accounts for about 35% of what goes into your score, because how you've managed credit in the past, whether or not you've missed payments in the past, is going to be the strongest predictor of whether or not you will miss payments in the future. The second most important factor is how much debt do you have? But here, and it accounts for about 30%. So it's the second most important factor and accounts for almost about a third of what goes into your score. But here is where the type of credit account matters. In the case of a mortgage, it doesn't even get factored into the calculation. It isn't even considered because it's seen that how much you owe on a mortgage is not really at all it doesn't provide any predictive value or not enough value to help us know whether or not that would influence your ability to make payments on time in the future. So it has virtually no power, so it's not considered. The most important factor in terms of your credit, or what kind of credit they look at most closely here, is your revolving credit. And particularly, how heavily are you using your available revolving credit? In other words, are you maxing out your credit cards? If so, that's going to really lower your score. Or are you basically paying your bill in full every month on your credit cards? In which case, that's going to give you the highest possible score. So that's why you want to be very careful about how you're utilizing your credit cards. Even if you're paying your bills in full each month on your credit cards, it's still going to lower your score a little bit. If you want to have the highest possible score, you actually don't want to be using your credit cards. But you need to have credit cards so that we know how you're going to manage that type of credit. Student loans don't seem to have much, if any, negative impact on your credit score as long as you have other forms of credit, particularly credit cards, and you're managing that credit well. Namely, you're always paying your bills on time every month, and basically, you're not carrying any credit card debt. A third, but much less important factor is the length of your credit history. How long have you had credit? And this accounts for about 15% of the weighting in the score. So the longer you've had credit, the better, because it means that the information we're seeing is probably more reliable. Another factor is how often are you applying for new credit? And this accounts for about 10% of your score. And this is actually measured or monitored by how frequently is your credit report being pulled because you've applied for more credit. So this is in the case of where you have an inquiry. But not all inquiries impact your credit score. It's only inquiries where you have given permission to some creditor to pull your credit report because you're trying to obtain additional credit. That's called a hard inquiry, and that increases the risk of you because now, if you're trying to take on more debt, that may make it more difficult for you to pay off the debt you already have. So that increases your risk. But there are also soft inquiries. These are inquiries where someone has pulled your credit report, but not because you've applied to get credit from them. For example, when you pull your own credit report, that's a soft inquiry, so it has no impact on your score. When an existing creditor pulls your credit report because you gave them permission to, simply to monitor how you're managing credit to see should they somehow modify the terms that they offer to you when they extended credit to you. There you're not getting additional credit, so again, it doesn't affect your score. When companies send you solicitations, hoping that you'll consider opening a credit account with them, this is common with credit card companies. When they got your name and address information to send you that solicitation, they got that through an inquiry, but it was not a hard inquiry, it was a soft inquiry because you weren't actually applying for credit. But if you then take them up on their offer and do in fact go ahead and apply for that a credit account, that credit card, for example, then they will actually pull a full credit report. That will be a hard inquiry. And by the way, as a student, if you're borrowing the Federal Direct Grad Plus loan, which many law students do, that loan does require that the lender, the federal government, review your credit to make sure you do not have adverse credit. So that will result in a hard inquiry on your credit report. And finally, the last factor that affects your score, and again accounts for about 10%, is account mix. Do you have more than one type of credit account? For example, do you have at least one installment loan? Do you also have revolving credit? That is better than if you have only one type of account. And remember, the worst kind of account to have in terms of all of this are those finance accounts. You want to try to avoid those if you can. So how can you maximize your credit score? Well, don't procrastinate. When you get a bill, pay it on time. You don't have to pay it early, but make sure it's paid and received. The payment is received by the company, the creditor, or whoever, by the due date. Keep your credit card debt as low as possible, preferably at zero. Although you need to have credit cards and you may want to use them for convenience, you never want to have credit card debt. You want to maximize the length of your credit history. Older accounts increase your credit score. So be very careful about closing accounts. Particularly, don't close the very first credit account you open. In general, it's recommended that although you may not want to use certain credit accounts in the future, it's probably not a good idea to close them, particularly if they're revolving accounts, because if you close the revolving account, not only does it perhaps shorten the length of your credit history if that was the first account you opened, it also now reduces the total available credit you have on your revolving credit accounts, so that's likely going to potentially increase your revolving credit utilization, and that's going to lower your score. And you want to minimize the opening of new revolving accounts. In other words, don't open new credit cards. You only need to have a couple of credit cards in order to really be able to get the highest possible credit score in terms of having the mix or the balance that the credit scoring system is looking for. Now, when it comes to developing and maintaining good credit, there's some important tips. First of all, as I said, pay all your bills on time. That's pretty obvious. You also need to notify your creditors of changes in your address, changes in your email address, for example, if you're communicating with them electronically. They need to know how they can stay in touch with you. Limit your use of credit cards for credit. In other words, when you're using credit cards, if you use them, make sure you're paying the full amount you owe to that credit card company by the due date each month. Don't just pay the minimum payment or a portion of what you owe. Make sure you're paying all of what you owe, so that in essence, you're not using it for credit, you're using it for convenience. And minimize your debt from all sources, but especially from credit cards. And get in the habit of reviewing your credit reports annually to make sure all the information is correct that's being reported to the credit bureaus, because sometimes errors occur, as we mentioned earlier. And it also is a good way to make sure that you're monitoring whether or not you've become a victim of identity theft or credit fraud, so that you can address that issue immediately. And as I've said once or twice before, but I want to reiterate, use credit cards for convenience, not for credit. In other words, if you're using your credit cards to make purchases, make sure you're paying the full balance owed on the credit card each month when the bill comes. And that means you also need to know your credit card ABCs. A credit card is helpful for emergencies, but emergencies rarely happen at the mall. B, beware of using credit cards for cash advances. Typically, the interest rate you're charged on balances from cash advances are higher than the balances you're paying interest on for purchases. You also likely have to pay fees for cash advances, so it's very costly. Credit card debt, C, can lower your credit score, so keep your utilization as low as possible. In other words, try to make sure you don't have credit card debt, and if you do, get it paid back as fast as you can. D, don't charge more on your credit cards than you can afford to pay each month. That way, you'll never be using your credit cards for credit. You'll only be using them for convenience. And as we bring this tutorial or this module to a close, I just have a few final comments. Remember, when using credit for any purpose, if you're not paying the full amount you owe each month when the bill comes, you are spending your future income. So you want to be careful about how you are spending that future income, because you're always going to have other uses for it. Because remember, every month, as you get your paycheck or as you have income to spend after graduation, you must decide how to allocate or spend that income each month across 4 buckets. The past, the money each month you have to be paying at a minimum on your debts, including your credit cards, your student loans, car payments, and so forth. The present, the money you need for your living expenses. The future, the money you should be saving for the future in terms of investing for retirement, saving for emergencies, saving for the purchase of a new home. If you're ignoring that bucket, you're falling farther behind. You're not building a financially secure future, the future you might want. And finally, there you have the philanthropy bucket. To what extent are you going to want to be making charitable donations and contributions to organizations? You're going to have lots of uses for your income. So you want to make sure that to the extent debt is factored into that, it's not taking up more than its share of what you want to be spending. And that means making sure you're very aware of your credit and how it affects you, not only financially, but in terms of your credit report and credit score. And you want to have a smart strategy so that financially you succeed at achieving the goals that are important to you. And that involves several keys to success. First of all, stay focused on your goals. Avoid unnecessary distractions. Anything that distracts you, particularly financially, is going to mean it's going to take you longer to achieve the goals that are important to you. Take control of your spending so that you borrow only what you need. To the extent you have to be borrowing money, and as a law student, you typically are borrowing money to help cover your expenses while in law school. How much you're borrowing is in direct correlation to how you're spending money. The more you spend, the more you're going to have to borrow, whether it's through your student loans or from other sources, if you've maxed out your student loans. So if you can reduce or control your spending, that will allow you to control or reduce your borrowing. And that will just lead to greater financial success. And manage your credit responsibly. As we focused in this module on credit, it should now be clear to you that having good credit is important, but that involves manage your credit responsibly, paying your bills on time every month, and making sure you're monitoring your credit report to make sure your credit is exactly what it should be. And you have opportunities to learn more about how to make good money management decisions. So I encourage you to check out all the money management modules, including the module on building your budget and the module on saving on spending, because both of those can also help you to have greater success in managing your money, particularly while you're in law school. And for more information in general about personal finance, check out bankrate.com, kiplinger.com, or money.cnn.com. And for more information specifically about credit, check out the Federal Trade Commission at consumer.ftc.gov and Fair Isaac and Company, or FICO, at myfico.com. Check out consumer information that's provided by the National Credit Bureaus at equifax.com, experian.com, and transunion.com. And check out other websites. A common and popular site is Credit Karma at creditkarma.com. These can all be sources for additional information about credit and how to maintain and develop good credit. Because you want to get on target financially. And to do that, you need to develop and maintain good credit, and you need to start doing that and continue doing that today and every day moving forward. That will lead to greater success financially. I hope this information is helpful to you. Good luck to you as you pursue your studies here at the School of Law at the University of San Francisco.